discussing how senior executives can realise their leadership potential. Joining us is Matthew Blagg, CEO of Criticaleye. Criticaleye provides senior executives with peer interaction across industry sectors. I personally heard nothing but praise from my network about Criticaleye's impact, so I'm excited for what insights Matthew will share with us today. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Lee. Delighted to be here.
And I'm joined by Kirsty Ames, who is emceeing the show and handling any questions from viewers. Hi, Kirsty. Kirsty looks like she's frozen. So Kirsty will be hopefully emceeing the show when she returns, and she will also be handling the chat function. So if you've got any questions, hopefully, assuming Kirsty returns, then she will pose those to Matthew. If Kirsty doesn't return, then I'm sure Matthew will be able to respond to questions after the show. So Matthew, from my time recruiting in the energy and utility sector, there's a ton of opportunity out there, but it's a roller coaster ride for today's leaders. You know, we know the energy transition needs to happen. There's excitement around what AI can bring to the table, but we're also dealing with global economic volatility, geopolitical concerns, and then I guess if you're a first-time leader, whether that be a CEO or non-exec, there's going to be stuff that you don't know. With that in mind, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing today's senior execs?
I think at the moment that across all sectors, the biggest issue at the moment is burnout. The combined workloads that are coming through from the fact that we can be 24/7, added to the increased stakeholder complexity and demands, means the sort of call of time, I think, is now stretched at a huge level, and I think that's absolutely affecting all leaders in all functions, in all areas. And it's obviously then linked to this element of hybrid sort of working, which has got demands that really make time the biggest issue. And then the danger of that from a leadership perspective is you become operational. So instead of leading, you end up doing. And I think that most organizations are trying to balance the short-term performance with the long-term strategy. And there is a degree of conflict between those two things. So it's not an easy environment to navigate from a leadership perspective.
I would absolutely echo that in terms of my network. Everyone is feeling burnt out, you know, doing far too much, going from meeting to meeting, and it's just not sustainable. And I think, yes, we're all grappling with balancing the short term and long term. And would I be right in saying that perhaps in other European countries, they're perhaps far greater at taking a long-term horizon, whereas in the UK, it's about shareholder value and return?
I don't know. I mean, I've just come back from Asia, and our members out in Asia. I don't think it's that different, actually. If I would say slightly worse, because they're on a plane the whole time now. So generally you're talking about the regional marketplace, because there is a wider reference point. Most businesses are international in that context, whereas in the UK, you've still got a specific number of organisations at a single market. I'm not convinced that the world is different anywhere in the world right now. I think it's got the same demands on it, the same opportunities, the risk level's high, geopolitical environment. Most countries of the world are dealing with complex geopolitical challenges, and there's a sort of huge nervousness and opportunity at the moment, which makes it kind of fun.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. Good. And I think another thing that executives experience quite a lot and don't necessarily openly share this is imposter syndrome. How common is that feeling amongst your members, Matthew?
It's quite interesting. When we start supporting an executive, there's a self-analysis form that they complete that is a series of open questions, and in their own language, talking about some of the strategic challenges they face, but also then leadership and their strategy. And you'd be surprised how often now imposter syndrome appears in there. What I would say, if I'm honest, I think female executives are more openly prepared to talk about it than male executives, in my experience. I think often what you'll in reading one of those documents, you'll see in a male executive it in there, but not written formally. Where in a female executive, they're happy to put it down in writing, and I think that's exciting, really, because I think ownership of things is the half the road to solution, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I think if you're managing male leaders or males in general, it's perhaps just trying to gently probe them around how they feel, because they won't necessarily voluntarily share it like females will. Welcome back, Kirsty.
Sorry guys, my internet just vanished as soon as we went live, but I'm back now. I'm so sorry, I'm here.
So next question, Matthew. So you specialise in peer learning at an executive and board level. What exactly is that?
It's effectively creating an environment where leaders from different industries and walks from life can learn from others, benchmark, share experiences, as such, sort of not be isolated. I mean, in a world where leadership is more isolated and the expectations of leaders grows, you're not going to have the answers all the time, and actually being able to openly discuss the challenges you face in a safe environment where you can debate those becomes really important. And that's effectively what Criticaleye is there to do: create an environment where you can benchmark, share, build relationships of trust. And I think trust is so important in any society, but particularly from a leadership perspective, and create an environment where you feel a bit less isolated and a bit more prepared to openly share some of the challenges. And in my mind, that the opportunity is always in the challenge. Anyone can run a business when it's easy. For me, leadership is always about running things when it's not easy, and thriving in that environment.
So it's learning from others, benchmarking ideas, skills, thinking, decision making, usually from others in similar industries. Yeah, and that isolation, one of your members told me around the benefits that when you're in a first-time role, you just don't know what you don't know, and then actually realizing that plenty of other execs go through exactly the same, challenges, and then to share that, and then actually realize that those challenges can be opportunities, is where the value is.
It is. I'll give you a quote, which is a very sad quote that I got from LinkedIn last week, which was a first-time executive member of an executive team, a rather large organisation, and we've been talking to her about support for 2 years, and she'd never taken it up. And the email that I got on LinkedIn was, "Matthew, I'd just like to say I've resigned, and my biggest regret is I didn't take your advice on day one and sign up for Criticaleye to get the reference points that I needed, because I realised I didn't know what I was walking into. And you said all of those things." And I think we underestimate the sort of complexity of these roles, and I think there can be a lot of focus on getting them, and the point should be about thriving in them rather than getting them. And I think actually, from a leadership development perspective, there's one thing I think is really important. The world's shifting and changing so fast. Anything that's got you there is not going to get you to the next stage, and I think that becomes really important when you get into the more senior roles.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think off air you said we have to, as leaders, run towards the problem rather than the way, and that's where the opportunity is.
Absolutely. I always worry when you talk to an executive and all they talk about the positives. I really, anyone can talk about the positives, but it's really when you get into the complex issues. There isn't a business alive that doesn't have complex challenges that are contradictory. And the element of understanding that contradiction is the opportunity. It's a bit like understanding risk. The best leaders in the world really understand risk and how to take advantage of it. So for me, that understanding the complexity, the challenge, is all about creating opportunity.
Yeah, there's a nugget. The best leaders understand risk. Okay, so how can peer learning support an executive leader's development, Matthew?
I think stripping out the peer learning bit, what I would say for any executive, the curiosity about how things are changing, wide reference points are essential. If you look at the great leaders, they're always benchmarking and taking insight from things around them. They also put them in places where they're not comfortable, where you learn from those different environments. And if you look at the years I've been sort of doing what I do, the differentiation between the leader that continually is learning to the leader that's finished learning is massive. I think peer learning is an environment that provides that structure, but it's about recognizing that there is a complex, changing, evolving world, that your ecosystem has got to change in the same pace. And that's very difficult when you're 24/7 got an in tray like this. Anyone on this call is already, looking at the things and going, well, look what I got to cover. And then you're talking about wide reference was, that's a lot to do. So I think a structured approach, which is what we do, is obviously puts more definition into something that I think should be naturally a part of any leader's DNA.
Brilliant. Okay, so to summarize then, it's being able to take information from a wide range of reference points. You're constantly learning, how to deal with the uncomfortable, that ability to cope with the evolving landscape that's constantly changing in a structured environment. Is that fair?
I think it's that. I think it's also being able to have things critically challenged. I mean, part of a peer learning is to actually put out what you're dealing with and have someone else challenge you, as such, providing insight on that. And one of the things we do for members, we do pop-up boards, which is sort of critiquing elements of their strategy and their plan. Deeply intrusive, not particularly nice, but incredibly safe environment. You'd be amazed how much changes as a result of that independent critique. And you're then taking it into the board. You've then got wider reference points, gives you confidence. You take it in a faster way. You articulate things differently. And I think that is really essential to thrive in this environment. You really have got to have confidence, and confidence is built by strong reference points, testing, retesting, and then being able to take people on a journey. It's for taking people on the journey because you've tested yourself before you go to the open market, because your customer is a much harder test than anyone that you're benchmarked with.
Absolutely. How much of the value comes from peers that have been through what you have done and faced similar challenges?
I think one of the advantages, and we've seen it with Criticaleye, we have different levels and things. I think that having people at different stages can be really, really advantageous in the sense of sometimes for CEOs being able to interact with executives who are not as senior actually can be hugely valuable, because you can lose sight of the operational environment when you get into the general's turret and get slightly away from it, and you can get protected information. So yes, I think usually you're looking for people who've got experiences of the specific scenario. And if you're a CEO, you want to benchmark with people who've been CEOs around the stakeholder complexity. But I think that you also need a slight element of chaos and difference to that is someone who's outside that normal structure, because they'll throw up really different ideas. And that again is, you generally don't want to have an environment which is too similar. It's a bit like when we mentor someone. You don't want to be mentored by someone who's similar to yourself. You need someone who has different competencies and skills, because they're going to challenge you more. And yet often if you left it to the executive, they pick someone they like. And again, you're looking for someone who's going to challenge you, who you respect. Like shouldn't be in the decision making.
Yeah,
good
I
point.
like that.
Good point.
Great points, Lee. I think it's about time that we move on to the tips, because we always like to have things as practical as possible. Is it time to move on to the next section?
I think it is. So Matthew, what are your top 3 tips to help senior executives realize their leadership potential?
So I think there's three things that are key. One is clear communication. And if you look simplistically, the further you go up through organization, the more succinct you have to be. That generally isn't something that happens overnight. So the difference between a member of stepping onto an executive team is you've got less time, and that's then linked to your competency to communicate. And so as you go up through the organization, as you get to that, you've got to be clear in terms of your communication. So that's number one. The second one, curiosity. World's changing faster. You know what you know today. You have a strategy for today. Where's your curiosity? What are you bringing to the table that's different? Do you have wider different reference points? We know things like technology, how it's pervasive. You've got to have an understanding and reference points that is different. And do you naturally have an environment that provides that? And then the third bit is, and in some ways, you touched on it, if you are incredibly busy, you've got to create an environment where you empower people to do things. And my natural view is that more senior leaders should be naturally lazy, i.e. you should be trying to get rid of things, because to a certain extent, you're absolutely full. The only way that you can cope is by removing things. It's why the better CEOs have smaller teams, because ultimately you can execute faster. So empowerment, trying to enable the business to move faster and the team that you have underneath you, and not getting bogged down in presenteeism, I think is really essential.
Brilliant. So the first tip was clear communication, and when we do MD CEO searches, the ones that get the number one, as you say, are clear, concise in their communication, and when they're perhaps answering questions, they use 25 words instead of 50. And I think, you know, that's important at all levels, but as you said, the more senior you go, the more important it is. And the tip two was curiosity, wasn't it? Around taking reference points from as wide as you can, that will help you in your role, and then be lazy. So that's really around delegating, isn't it? But with control, presumably, Matthew.
Yeah, but not too much control, Lee. I think that there's a danger that control can kill things. And, you know, it's one of the challenges you get in businesses that have things that have real mission critical impacts. It makes it very difficult to create a culture where you move fast. So I think understanding where the business can be freer in order that it can move faster, and where actually you might want to reduce some of the controls, is, I think, really, really important. Got to remember as well, we're talking a lot of it about the energy sector, specific insight, often based with engineers who are very literal. So the element of trying to think in a non-literal way, and particularly with regard to communication, often in my experience, difference between the executives coming through is they know how to communicate with technical areas to technical people, but be able to articulate what they do to someone who isn't an engineer and who doesn't understand things, massively important if you're going onto the board. And so I think that element of being able to disseminate what you know into a format that the other person can understand is really important. And I think it does link to that curiosity, reference points, empowerment, because I think they're all linked.
Got it. So it's knowing your audience, talking in a kind of language that they understand, like those kind of disc profiles. Do you also think that perhaps some leaders struggle to let go and micromanage? Is that a challenge do you see?
I think most leaders struggle to let go.
Okay.
I mean, at the end of the day, you get there because of the things that you're good at. So usually as you go further up, that you do hold on to things. And I think that it is I think this is probably particularly true if you take engineers. It's a very exact background. So your training from a young age is something to be literal and exact. So then you're looking at, you're going to let it go. That's quite a hard thing to do. And if you take, you know, the step up from, so COO to CEO, you know, you're generally used to being running the machinery and doing it all. And then suddenly you're not, and you kind of feel you've lost it. And then you tinker with the person you put in charge to do it. And then, you know, that process, I think, is pretty usual, isn't it? I think we all get that bit wrong at times. We've all got to sort of step back. I think when you get swamped with work, you become much more transactional. And I think that the difference between good leaders is they naturally are able to step back and create an environment where the team underneath them get step back. But it is more difficult at the moment because there's so much coming at you. It does make it difficult.
For those that are super ambitious, how important is relationship building amongst peers, your boss's boss? You know, I think I've seen, if I'm honest, quite average leaders really progress because they're very good at upward management, whereas perhaps others that are perhaps better performers but not so good at relationship building haven't progressed as far. What's your view on that relationship building piece? You know, not being a sycophant, but being able to upward manage. I
think relationships are still vitally important, both internal and external, and those that form relationships over a long period of time outperform those that don't. I mean, I do think that's absolutely true. things come back round, how you treat people. It's quite interesting in terms of, we see lots of behaviours as you will in the work that you do. You can differentiate the high performers from the less, the ones who actually treat people how you would want to be treated, and generally it's faster, quicker, builds trust. That competency, I think, is massively important. Sort of people want to work for people that they trust, respect, and all of that stuff. So relationships, I think, is absolutely key to success. And over a long period of time, if you don't build them, you come unstuck.
And that could be quite a challenge for someone that's perhaps a bit more introverted, because it's not necessarily their natural style. I think research shows that introverted leaders tend to make better leaders than extroverted leaders. So that's again where you're kind of having to go out your comfort zone to be better, aren't you? It
is. I think though that statistically most extroverts were introverts who fought hard to get out, because I think in a lot of ways, if you are introverted, you do have to force yourself into things. And again, I was advising a younger executive a couple of days ago about what they need to do, and my general advice is find your weak spot and then really focus on it, because it will become your strength if you do. And again, I think that element of being not pushing yourself to engage with others, I mean, it's a massive barrier. If you get to the real top table and you're an introvert, I mean, it's really difficult to be successful.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions, Kirsty, in the chat so far?
At the moment, I think everybody's a bit like me, just absolutely hypnotized by the knowledge that Matthew has. But if there are any questions that you guys have got, we're coming towards the end of the show, so please pop them in the chat and I will bring them up to Matthew and Lee.
Thank you, Kirsty. So Matthew, what do you think are some of the traits of the most successful executives are?
I think that you've got basics there, haven't you? You've got hard working. So the element of, if you want to be successful in life, doesn't matter what you are, you've got to work damn hard. And I think you set that up young, and anyone earlier in the career puts themselves in there. I think puts themselves in places where they're exposed. I mean, I think it's very easy to be in a protected environment. Thinks ahead, thinks about how things are going to evolve, and does create space. I mean, I think that element of space is massively important in a modern world. And it's not just about work, it's work-life sort of mix and balance. I mean, I've got 2 young kids. The reality of it is to balance the different moving parts between, running a business, providing support to other people, and then your family and your wife. That's not easy. I mean, it really is a difficult balancing act. You get one of them ill, and I work with my wife, so that's got positives and negatives, as I'm sure she would tell you. That mix of it. And what I would say, Lee, I put boards together a long time ago, and I was quite naive, thinking I could size someone up in about 2 millionths, because I was young and arrogant. I think actually what you realise is that people are so complex, situations are complex, and I think that would also be true when you're talking about an executive and their development. Understanding the environment around you, the sort of stage you're at with your family, your personal life, I think is really important, to also the energy that you've got behind you to really push in a career perspective, because there are times when actually it might be better to sit and do your job really well, and there are times when you should be pushing really hard. And I think my experience of people is that they're really complex and got a lot going on, and you want them to thrive, and that's about positive energy. And sometimes people are in difficult places, and you've got to understand that.
That's a really good point, and that links back to your earlier point around challenges around burnout. If you're working 50, 60 hours a week and you've got 3 children and a partner that also works, you can't give your all of the time, and you've got to kind of flex. Sometimes that's going to be more important towards your personal life, and other times it's the work life. So very difficult.
But I also think that it does force you to empower more. So essentially the point thus is it makes you become much more critical of your time and much better at making sure it's impactful. And I think that is that time piece. What is in your control? How can you manage it? How can you remove things that aren't adding value? And then are you making sure that you have space for yourself? Because the one thing in leadership is you inject energy in others. So if you're low in energy, you're going to inject negative energy into others. So it's the biggest things: holidays, breaks, put them all in, I always think it's madness when you talk to an executive, they haven't had their holidays and breaks, and you can just tell that they're running on air. They're pushing all that pressure down into the organization, creating work. So that balance is really important.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have had a good question. I think now might be a good time. So David has asked, I thought the point about focusing on your weaknesses was interesting. I'd always thought it was best to hire for your weaknesses and focus on your strengths. It would be good to get Matthew's reaction to that. So Matthew, what do you think?
I know that there's a load of thoughts that that's a good idea, but if you take the theory, the higher up you go, you have to be a utility player. You can't be a utility player if you've only got specific strengths. So for me, if you want to become a leader, you have to focus on the areas that you are weaker in, and you have to understand them. And generally, through understanding them, you can invest time in. So I think you can get to if you take any team, you can be the technical expert and you can get all the way on there. And I think that you can focus 100% on your strengths. You ain't going to get to the CEO role. You are going to be found out. And when you've got to articulate something outside of your strength, you don't have the competency and capability. So for me, it's what do you want to achieve? And generally with people we're talking, they want to get further. And that further is about width. And strip it down to nothing. Nearly every single of the executives we talk to want to have a non-executive career. It's a width role. You can't be a sort of a one-trick pony on there. You have to have an understanding of how things join together. So for me, as you go further up the organization, that competency which has got you there could become the reason you don't get to the next level.
Very interesting. Hopefully that answers your question, David.
Just one more question on that topic. I think off air you mentioned that strength and leadership capability is a top priority for boards right now. Why is it a top priority right now? Is it because it's just much more difficult to be a leader?
I think at the moment that the pressure of time, and if you've got to the top end of a leadership team, you're also at a point when you're looking at what happens next. It's quite easy to go plural at the moment, and so you are seeing more leaders exit the executive environment, which also means you're seeing executives stepping up into complex roles and have less experience of reference points. So if you take most boards, that succession piece is front of mind in their mindset. If you take the financial environment, it's difficult. Cost of capital isn't going anywhere at the moment. So that puts pressure on things. That pressure feeds down into the organization. And then it's the workload. And it doesn't really matter whether you talk to the board. If you talk to any non-executive or chair at the moment, they'll tell you they're struggling with the workload. You then go into the executive team and they've got so many different things coming at you. So it is a real challenge. And then to a certain extent, you get to those top roles, you're independently wealthy, you can walk. What am I doing this for? What is in it for me? And more people now post-COVID look at that and go, actually, I don't need this. And of course, their health is more important. So there is, I think, a natural pressure. By the way, I think that creates huge opportunity. As it ever has. That means you've got regime change, you've got youth coming through, you've got opportunities for leaders to step in. And in my view, this is an environment you should be running towards with excitement. And if you're not, you should be heading to the exit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I could listen to you speak all day, Matthew. I've been hypnotized, but unfortunately we have come towards the end of the show. So in a second, we're going to come to Matthew and ask for your top tip. But before then, I'm going to try and do a summary of all the information that you've given. And that's been quite a lot, so bear with me. So I'm sure there were some interesting challenges at the beginning, but unfortunately my internet was not conducive to me listening to them. However, what I did hear is something I thought was a really good. Leadership is about running a business in hard times and not when it's good, because anybody can do it when it's good, and true leaders do it when it's bad, when it's hard. And something that can really help with that is peer learning. So it helps you to focus not only on the curiosity that you've got about progression and learning yourself, but it also offers an opportunity to be challenged by your peers and people from different aspects to make sure that you're not kind of getting settled into it. You're constantly progressing and growing and developing as a leader, and that's what peer learning can do. And part of that is helping you develop various things. So first of all, you have to be a clear communicator if you want to be a good leader, because as you progress up the ladder, you get busier and busier. You've got less and less time to sort of correct mistakes and go back and explain things. So being a clear communicator is key. Secondly, you have to be curious. You have to be looking out there constantly at industry changes, what things are happening in other markets that you could perhaps take in. And again, that's something that peer learning can help with. And finally, I think my favorite one was this ability to empower is so key to leadership, because you obviously from the top, but you made a really interesting point around the traits of a successful exec, because yes, you have to be hardworking. Yes, you have to be good at your job. Yes, you have to put yourself in difficult positions where you have to be exposed, but you also have to take care of yourself and understand where you are in your life and what you can give, because you have to have energy to give to the business. So that does mean resting. It does mean potentially, based on other things that are in your life, maybe this moment isn't the best time to go for that role. Maybe wait a year when you've got more energy, because if you're energized, your team will be energized, and that will lead to great and wonderful things. How does that feel as a summary?
Brilliant, Kirsty. Couldn't have done better.
Yes. It's always exciting for me when I get it. Okay, so obviously, Matthew, I mean, I just rumbled through a summary there, but you've given a lot of information today. So people are watching this and they're thinking, right, I want to be in those senior roles in energy and utilities. I want to become a leader. How do I put myself in the position where I'm going to get there? What's the first thing that I need to do in order to do that?
Be honest about and self-aware about where you sit today. You know, understand who you are and what you're good at and how other people view you, and then think about whether you have the right reference points around you. Because really, the future's changing so fast. You've got to have different reference points. And I think being isolated, you might be more isolated than you think. And that the beginning is to make sure you know where you are.
Fantastic. I think that's an excellent point. Now, obviously, Matthew, you've gone through a lot today, as I've said. If anybody has any questions or if they want to learn more about Criticaleye, is the best thing to do just to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, please do.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that you're tagged in the comments below, so I'll make sure that people can find you that way. Okay, Lee, I think we're towards the end of the show now. So do you want to close down, give our thanks and take us away?
I do. Matthew, so many great nuggets of advice today. So thank you for being our guest speaker. Kirsty, thank you for emceeing. And thank you to our viewers. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks all. Thanks, Kirsty. Thanks, Lee. Take care, everyone.